Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fifth webinar as part of the Construct Innovate series on sustainability planning and in construction. Today's topic is on sustainable transport, and we have three fantastic speakers. The first one is Tiago Oliveira, Associate Director at Arup, and he will be talking about Timpu's low emissions transport master plan. The second speaker is Larissa Miller, also Associate Director at Arup, talking about traveling in a woman's shoes. And our final speaker is Siobhan Kennedy, Infrastructure Officer at Antashka, who will be speaking about safe routes to school, sustainable transport for school students. You're very welcome. We are going to start with the three presentations, about 15 minutes each, and then we will be left with 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions throughout the presentations, please write them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and then we'll come back to them at the end of the presentation. So I would like to invite Tiago to share his presentation, and we'll start with that first speaker.
I'm going to talk about this project, which is a really interesting and rewarding project that I worked in. My colleague Larissa, that's going to be talking afterwards, worked in the same project. We were asked by the government of Bhutan to do a transport master plan that had the name low emissions before. In effect, all transport master plans we work in are low emissions, and they aim at low emissions among many other things. So that was a name that was given to us, and we try to make the most in terms of the benefits to the city. So that's a view of the city. And for those who don't know where Thimphu is, and I think I need to, yes. So Bhutan is in Asia, just sandwiched between India and China, north of Bangladesh. It's in the Himalayas, and that actually is quite important for the city in terms of the setting within a mountainous area. So Thimphu is in the west of the country. It's the capital. It's the largest urban agglomeration. It's about 130,000 people, 170,000 people. I'm not too sure, depending on how you count. What's interesting is it's nestled along a valley. We don't work in a lot of cities like this where there's literally one corridor going along the valley, and you can see there that it's surrounded by very high mountains, and everything needs to happen in a very constrained area. I'm just going to show some holiday pics, because it's a really beautiful place, and it's a really interesting place to work on, and that's important as well. Once you're there, you think differently about the place. These are just some images that gives an idea of the mountains and the place, but it's also not a complete backwater as some people would probably think. I mean, there's infrastructure, there's building, there is a city. It's a city that works, and in many ways it works nearly better than our own experience of cities. One thing that I've found there is that the drivers are extremely courteous. There's no speeding. Is a dual carriageway with speed bumps, which is something that we don't see much in the Western world, and and the drivers are very courteous. So we're not dealing with some of the issues that we have to deal with in places like Ireland. This is an image of the main street. So the shopping street is down below, and just gives an idea of what the city center is like and the scale of it. And this is an image of starting to look into the infrastructure that people have to walk and cycle, and it's limited. And the dual carriageway, for example, these people are trying to access a bus stop that you can see there where the taxi is, and there's no pedestrian. There's no footway. or the pedestrian crossing, for example. And then you have this kind of mishmash of surfacing. There's these people have to cross. This is supposed to be a zebra crossing, but it doesn't have a continuous route. You have to climb onto that central median that you see there on the left. There's plenty of trip hazards, or we would consider trip hazards here, but actually things work okay, and a lot of it is to do with what I said before. The drivers are very courteous, and they don't speed, and they stop when they see pedestrians. Again, just an idea of what the conditions for walking are. um Very, these things through the middle are slabs that cover drainage, and they're not properly laid out, and they're difficult to deal with in terms of the pedestrian environment. And then there's a lot of level changes. There's, for example, drainage that is not covered, leading onto a footway, and again, um, the 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 median, which is elevated, there's no drop, so you have to actually, it becomes a trip hazard in the middle of a dual carriageway. um, a main footway on the main street with no protection down to a significant drop, and my colleague there exemplifying how dangerous it is. And then organically grown streets that aren't properly paved, that don't have the required drainage, and so on. So this is the type of environment where that people deal with, and this really brings in, this is why we're working on this. This is what we want to resolve. We have some really good conditions. We have the interest of the people. We have the interest of the government. We have people really wanting to improve, and they just need help in what should they focus on, and what are the design and planning aspects that they need to concentrate on. So again, this is access to a bus stop. There's a taxi there waiting for the bus to arrive, so that they can bring people up the hill, because it's too difficult to walk. So to the outlying neighborhoods, and there's the family trying to cross the dual carriageway, waiting in and around the median there, which happens to be planted as well. Again, an attempt, you know, um, to do a good pedestrian link, but the way it's done over a stream that in certain seasons, the monsoon season particularly, is a heavy flowing stream, and the pedestrian facility goes over, but with gaps where you'd need to be careful not to fall into. And this is an interesting one. Footways are extremely high, because they don't dig into the ground to put drainage and utilities. They literally box over the utilities. So you can see the height of the the footway. I've seen an adult person having to step onto a footway using the knee, literally climbing onto a footway at some point. So what were we looking at? I mean, the vision for Timpu that we set out and agreed with the government was really that Timpu should be the sustainable transport system will connect people and places, reduce carbon emissions, and enhance the city's economy and attractiveness. So those were overarching objectives to the benefit of residents, visitors, and businesses. And that's important to set the tone. This is what we're trying to resolve, and agree that with the people we're working for and with. We also told them that in our perspective, sustainable transport needs to have a clear hierarchy of modes that starts with pedestrian and cycling, that goes on to public transport, service and deliveries, and private cars at the end. And agree that with them up front is really important. So the principles is that we would prioritize people over vehicles, promote sustainable transport, integrate land use and transport planning, again, really important. And we've done this in the context of a parallel project that we were also involved, which was the Timpu structure plan. Which was focused a lot on land use and the growth of Timpu into the future. Also looking into transition of vehicle fleets to clean fuels, and managing current and future travel demands. So that's much more of the softer side of things, and how do we manage demands, and how do we encourage people to travel less distances, and more sustainable modes. So 5 in effect is a result of 1 to 4. Our strategies covered a number of aspects. So non-motorized transport, walking and cycling. So public transport, vehicular circulation, really important because of traffic management and because of the constraints that we saw the city being embedded into. We looked into freight. We looked into low carbon mobility, shared mobility, placemaking, governance, all of these aspects. And the components of the strategies in the end, and I'm skipping a big part of the master plan, obviously, all of the analysis and so on, but this is what we came up with. So enhanced walkability, and there's a number of aspects there. This is interesting because you'd think this is very traditional, that people carrying the kids like this, but it's not that they cannot afford a pram. There's no wealth, but there's not a lot of poverty. It's literally because there's no point in using prams and buggies because of the conditions for walking. So these women carry the children this way from a practical point of view. Cycling, it's a mountainous area, but there's potential for cycling, but there's not a lot. That's the only photo I could take of a bicycle in nearly 2 weeks in the place, and it was hanging off a balcony. So establish a culture for cycling would be a really important thing. Public transport, I immediately identified as being a really important one. So we're looking into simplifying the bus network, increasing frequencies, and looking to the periphery areas and change from regular services to on-demand services. A really important part of the strategy. We're looking into last mile connectivity. So how do people access bus stops? I mean, how do people access their point of employment and so on? And you can see an example there of a bus stop with no waiting facilities, and that needs to be looked at. We have parking. I love that photo. Please park nicely. It really epitomizes what Bhutanese people are about. They're very gentle and nice, and they don't force people to do things. They kind of encourage them, and it's great to work in that type of environment. But we're looking into electric cars. We're looking into transport-oriented development to encourage that land use and transportation integration that encourages walking and public transport. Freight is an issue, but it's also a great opportunity. The shape of the city and the fact that the city is only accessed from 2 points, from the east and from the south, means that it's possible to plan for a transshipment point where there is going to be the potential for electric vehicles only going into the center. So plan towards that. Is not an overnight thing, but so that logistics and distribution hub in a place called Olaka would be a really important point in that sense. Electric vehicle, there is some electric charging, and electricity is something that Bhutan has in spades with hydroelectric energy. But they import oil from India, which is a big commercial partner, and it is a challenge to change the fleet and put the infrastructure to kind of get off that hook at some point. So the transition of bus fleets is one of the first projects that is being done, where the city bus fleet will be electrified over the next few years. And reducing peak hour demand is important. So to look into school travel, for example, to stagger start and end times, so you reduce the demand at peak times, and promotion of remote working, similar to anywhere else in the world. Mobility hubs, and this is a taxi rank here, so people, it's very, very logical. If you want to go to a certain place, you go to the person who's holding the sign. They're not fighting for customers. They're just being rational. And that's what sustainable transport is all about. Is about being rational. It's about making the most of the resources you have. And I think that a place like Bhutan is actually very prepared for the encouragement of sustainable transport overall. And I think I've reached my time, and thank you very much for listening.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to join you here today. I'm Larissa Miller. I'm the Transport Advisory Leader at Arup here in Ireland, and I'm delighted to be here today because I'm going to be sharing some of the interesting findings from a research project that Arup delivered for Transport Infrastructure Ireland. It was called Travelling in a Woman's Shoes, and it's all about the challenges that women in Ireland face when choosing sustainable transport modes. The TII commissioned this research because they knew how important it was to understand the motivations and the factors that influence our travel choices. And because historically, transport planning has been very focused on catering to the morning commute, which was traditionally male dominated, and that has resulted in some disproportionate outcomes for women and men when considering their transport choices. And even today, men and women do travel differently. And so, what this research discovered was that women's travel patterns and their needs can often be more complex than men's. And so, this research aimed to understand the circumstances that influence how women travel, their attitudes and experiences around travel, and then finally, how these can be better addressed so that sustainable travel can be encouraged and supported for everybody. And I guess one key message before we get started is that when you do aim to improve transport systems and experiences for women, you are actually improving those transport systems and experiences for everybody. So I hope you'll be convinced of that by the end of this presentation. And while this research was conducted a few years ago, it's still very relevant today. Ireland has significant targets around decarbonisation and is investing a lot in sustainable transport infrastructure. So we want to make that as appropriate for everyone as possible. But before I jump to the research findings, I'll do a little bit of scene setting and introduce you to the research methods that we used to deliver this. So firstly, why is sustainable travel so important for Ireland? It's because the transport sector emits around 12 megatons of carbon emissions every year, and this accounts for around 20% of the country's emissions. And private car use is by far the largest contributor to those emissions, accounting for around 43% of emissions in 2021. And the Irish government has set really clear and ambitious targets to address those emissions, reducing them by 50% compared to 2018 by 2030, and aiming to be net zero by 2050. And certainly the transition to electric vehicles will help with achieving those targets, but it won't get us all of the way there. And there are many other benefits to sort of the modal shift to sustainable travel rather than just getting everyone to upgrade their vehicle to an EV. So it really is that climate crisis, which is posing that urgent need to reimagine how we live and how we get around. And it's important that everyone in Irish cities has access and opportunity to those sustainable transport options. So that's the driver for the research. And now I want to set the scene a little bit by introducing you to some of the important characteristics of women in Ireland and their mobility. So before we got into the new research as part of this project, the team looked at the available data from the CSO and other sources as the building blocks. I've brought in a few new stats where possible from the 2022 census. For example, women work less than men. The participation in the workforce is 56% for women, but 67% for men. Another statistic from the background research done was that 18.1% of married women work more than 40 hours per week, but that's far less than the same for married men, which is 51% of married men working more than 40 hours per week. And this chart down the bottom, you can see the participation for women at every age group is less in the workforce than for men. But it's not because women aren't busy that they're not working so much, it's because they have significant roles in caregiving. 45% of Irish women in 2019 provided care for others on a daily basis. And the time that they spend providing care is more than double for men. So 21 hours on average per week for women and around 11 hours per week for men. So moving now to how women travel. They use the car more than men do. 71% of all women's journeys are by private car compared to 67% of men's. But the opposite is the case when it comes to cycling. So less than 2% of women reported cycling to work compared to more than 4% of men. And the reasons why they travel can be different too. So twice as many women are likely to make a care journey than men, and 25% of their journeys are related to shopping compared to 20% of men. So you can really start to see the differences in travel patterns there. Now, the project also involved some literature review of international research to understand what's already been identified around women's travels from elsewhere. And this research kind of identified 4 key themes. It's no surprise that safety is one of the biggest concerns for women when choosing how to travel. Some of the stats from places elsewhere found that 60% of women didn't feel safe to take the bus. 93% of women felt vulnerable because of their gender in public. And 47% of women may take a longer route or a different route in order to feel safer. So it might be better lit, or they might have more people around to reach their destination. And some of the other themes coming through from this literature review were around reliability. So knowing that the public transport service will show up when it says that it will. Accessibility, women may be traveling when they're pregnant or with small children or supporting an elderly family member to travel. So they want to know that they'll have access to, you know, the public transport stop or station and the vehicle itself as well. And then themes around convenience and comfort, so having access to bathrooms when you're traveling, not too lengthy wait times, a seat when boarding a public transport vehicle, all came through the literature as well. So then when we started to look at the research project itself, it really took a 2-pronged approach to answer a central research question around what motivates or constrains Irish women to select different mobility options as part of their daily travel. The first step was ethnographic research in the form of 21 really in-depth interviews with women across the cities of Cork and Dublin to really get behind the reasons for their travel, their attitudes and their preferences and the barriers and challenges that they face, and even do a little bit of traveling with them. And then the second step was a quantitative survey of 1,000 people across the country, both men and women, to sort of validate those findings. And those participants were a diverse demographic and geographical areas and had different types of transport use as well. And the interviews resulted in featuring 5 personas of anonymized women from those interviews who each have very different circumstances and concerns influencing how they travel. So from a student who was concerned about traveling alone late at night and attracting unwanted attention, all the way through to a grandmother who has childcare duties for her grandchildren, so she relies on her car to carry out this role, and a whole range of people in between as well. So developing these really helped to introduce us to the women as part of the research. And so findings from the research, it confirmed that women do shoulder more caregiving responsibilities consistent with those global trends. The research found that amongst women with children, 84% consider themselves to have the sole or the lion's share of the responsibility for childcare, compared with 48% of men. Those two numbers don't add up to 100%. We also found that 30% of women surveyed provided primary care to another adult, either professionally or personally. And interestingly, over here on the right, in terms of journey purpose, for men and women with families, the main reasons why they traveled were different. So for men, the main reason that they traveled was to go to and from work. But for women, it was to drop off and collect children and other family members. And both men and women in Ireland do rely heavily on the car. So 81% of women and 85% of men have access to or own a car and definitely use it as well. Now, around safety, we found from the research that safety is an issue for all people, with 1 in 3 public transport users having witnessed or experienced some form of harassment or violence when using public transport. But when you look at sexual harassment and assault on public transport, it definitely disproportionately affects women. The research did find that women were the most vulnerable in Dublin, but that is the city which uses the most public transport. 7% of women in Dublin reported having experienced sexual harassment on public transport. Of the survey, 55% of women said they would not use public transport at night, and that compares to 35% of men. And 34% of women said that on occasion they've actually not traveled because of feelings of insecurity about their safety. And that compares to 24% of men under the same circumstances. Now, around attitudes and preferences, both men and women to a very high degree consider the car to be a necessity, 95% of women and 93% of men. A few, optimistic stats come through. Women in Dublin were keen to drive less. 47% of women said they would like to drive less compared to 34% of men in the same place. But then when you look at the results of women ranking the different transport modes and associating them with, positive statements, the car really rises to the top. So women nominated the car as the most pleasant way to travel. They said it was the least stressful way. It gave them the most feelings of safety. It was the most child-friendly transport mode, and it was a transport mode they could rely on. Only walking shows up for the transport mode acknowledged as being good for your health and for giving you some time to yourself. So there's a real preference for the car coming through from those survey results. So moving quickly now to some of the implications. We really wanted to understand how sustainable travel can be encouraged. The research results helped the team to identify some of the policy and practical implications. In the area of transport options, reducing the distances that need to be traveled so you can choose to travel by walking. That 20-minute city concept is important, and that's a lot to do with land use planning as well. Opportunities to better facilitate multimodal travel, but transferring between different modes and doing things to reassure people that cycling can be safe and that the bus will be turning up soon. The research also identified that travel habits start early and there could be efforts to enable children's independent mobility, both on public transport and walking and cycling. Addressing safety, of course, means looking at safety audits when developing transport projects, ensuring women are involved in the design process, and doing things like providing lighting and CCTV at public transport stops and along streets. Being inclusive and having a focus on accessibility for all is really important. It's recognizing that women may be traveling while pregnant, with prams or with small children, or traveling with those elderly people they're caring for. And finally, in sort of the transition to net zero, bringing that gender lens to shared travel like ride sharing and carpooling, supporting flexible travel so you don't need to travel as often, or you can travel at different times of the day as part of your work, and considering the messaging around climate change education as well. And just finally, for the women who are featured in the report as personas across those different life stages and circumstances, the report really identifies there needs to be that understanding there isn't one policy initiative that will address everybody's needs and challenges. So understanding that people travel in different ways may mean a range of solutions need to be identified to encourage that good uptake of sustainable travel. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Thanks a million. And yeah, as Mike said, I'm Siobhan. I'm an infrastructure officer with the Safe Routes to School program. Yeah, so I guess just to start, just to give a kind of a brief overview of the program. The program has 3 objectives. The first is to create a safe space for students at the front of school. And I suppose part of this is also to maybe reduce the presence of cars at the front of school, and to make it a more pleasant space for those arriving on foot, bike, and yeah, generally a more school-friendly front of school space. The other objective then is to look at safety along the routes to school, so where students are travelling from and which ways they might travel to school, and to look at how that could be made more safe, or if there's particular problem points, maybe crossings that are challenging, maybe to take that into account. And then the third objective is to make more bike parking available to schools. That part of the programme is delivered directly by Safe Routes to School on an annual basis, and more than 500 schools have received cycle parking already, which is great. The map on the right there shows the spread of schools nationally who are part of the programme. So it was opened up to all schools in Ireland in Q1 of 2021, and 932 schools applied and enrolled in the programme. So the kind of maroon dots there, they're the round one schools, so they were selected in July 2021. And then there's another 108 schools then that were rolled into the programme in round two in December 2022. We're working in rounds because it's just not possible for the team to work with all 932 schools at the same time. And we work with all 31 local authorities, and they play a very key role in the Safe Routes to School schemes, particularly the design and delivery, and I'll touch on that a bit more later in the presentation. Yeah, so where do we start? I guess we start with understanding the context. So whilst there might be similarities nationally about the kind of general trends of how students get to and from school, with each school there will be kind of particular specific aspects of their context that we have to take into account. The first step, or the kind of primary tool for us as infrastructure officers, is a survey that we run with parents. So the school support us with that. They issue it to their school community, and that survey helps us to understand where students are travelling from. So that's this image here on the top left. This is the map that we would end up with for all schools. It shows us the density of students and kind of where they're travelling from, where the orange circle there is 2 kilometres from the school and the blue circle is 1 kilometre from the school. And then we also get a chance to understand how students are currently travelling. So we have graphs that's similar to this one here. And we'll also look into that for those 1 kilometre and 2 kilometre distances. So we start to get a real sense of how the students are coming to school and where they're coming from. And then there's also an option for parents to provide a little bit more information as comments. And that can be really interesting. So for example, this is one sample comment, but that the route to the school is fine, but it's when they get to the school that it's difficult because of parking on the footpath at the front of school, and that makes it more complicated. Sorry, that's this one here. But yeah, and then we take this information about where students are traveling from, and we then go out and actually identify the potential routes that students are traveling. This is an example here, and we audit those routes. So we walk or cycle the routes depending on the context, and we try and capture any kind of opportunities or maybe challenges or issues that are present, and that all gets documented. And we would go and meet the principal with the local authority and try and observe the front of school at school start and finish times to really see the reality of kind of either what's working well or what isn't. And then we bring all that together, and we move on then to develop a delivery plan. So this is where we bring together all that context and develop a set of design concepts, both for the front of school and for the identified routes to school, really looking at what the opportunities are for improvement and what the key steps are that could make it easier, both for those who are already walking and cycling to school, and also to maybe help people who want to walk and cycle to school to do that. And these delivery plans, they're kind of heavily based off the Safe Routes to School design guide, which is available on the website. But, we also reference, there's the new cycle design manual, DMORs, and then also taking into account any wider active travel schemes that are being developed by the local authority that maybe touch on the routes or even the front of school, and how to bring that in and incorporate it. Yeah, and then I suppose from there, we then have a delivery plan that's agreed with the local authorities and the school, and that part of the process is finalised. And then the local authorities take that kind of set of design concepts and they bring it through the design and the statutory processes. And then on the Safe Routes to School side, I suppose our role then shifts slightly, and while the local authority are leading on the design and statutory process, we kind of step in, I suppose, on a more supportive role with the school so that they can really champion the work. So obviously going through statutory processes, for example, if there's any planning process as part of that, we can support the school to really champion the works, to convey to the local community, the school community, why support is necessary for that, the positives that will come of it, and why the school really wants to see it happen. And from there, then we get to implementation, which is obviously the most exciting part. And again, we can support the schools once works are starting and even once they're complete, to really help them with the kind of communication side on this, conveying what changes are coming, when they're coming, what that will mean for people coming to the school, how the new infrastructure can be used. And again, the kind of feeling of championing the works, that it's not something that happens to the school, it's something that the school are part of and engaged in, and that it's for the school, and it's hugely beneficial. And this is what results. So this is Ulmo School in Limerick City. So you can see the before, and this is the after, and certainly visually it's much more appealing. And there's a lot of placemaking elements here with the planters and the pencil bollards and the kind of coloured roundels and the road markings. The carriageway has been narrowed, so there's a lot more space for pedestrians as they're coming in. But the biggest change here is that this is now a school street. So at school start and finish times every day, traffic is restricted to local access only. So you have a much, much, much less presence of traffic, and the space feels completely different, not just because visually it looks different, but just in terms of how it's used and how, in terms of who's using it, it has a very different feeling. This school in Kildare, so this is the before. You can see the parking on the footpath. So I highlighted that from a parent comment that, you know, it wasn't from the same school, but just that you can see someone here walking. The space there is much restricted for them, and it's going to be much more challenging getting up to the school. The scheme introduced pencil bollards and not pencil bollards as well, and some of the coloured roundels. And again, you can see the big difference. The space is retained there for pedestrians. It feels safer. It's more visual that it's a school, and it, again, a big change. This is school in Leash, so similar problems with footpath parking, and kind of feeling like the area, the space at the front of school is very dominated by cars. Now you can see there's pedestrian priority at the vehicular entrance into the school. The pencil bollards are protecting the footpath. And again, this kind of visual elements that are playful and fun as well, but also really highlight to drivers, this is a school, you know, the way that you drive has to reflect that and has to follow that. And then this is School of Knowledge in Galway City. So this is another example of a school street. And this is the school street in action. So at school start and finish times, traffic access is local only. So students all walk and cycle, and it's lovely to see. And it's, I guess, yeah, a really lovely sound to hear students talking and laughing and enjoying the space as they travel to school. Galway City Council is in the process at the moment of making further improvements, I guess, to the infrastructure there, as a kind of an additional benefit to the school street. So you can see the very narrow footpaths here being widened, and there's some improvements coming to the junctions at the entrance and exit to the school street. Yeah, and I suppose challenges and opportunities. So all of that doesn't happen necessarily easily, or every context has different challenges and opportunities that it presents. I guess one of the main ones sometimes is the school design or the location. So we do have a number of schools that are on high-speed routes, which obviously presents a very specific type of context. This is Scoil Baile, which is just outside Moycullen in County Galway. It sits on the N59 on a section of the road that's where the speed limit is 100 kilometers per hour. Very high traffic volumes, lots of HGVs. So obviously a very challenging context. We are working with TII on a trial for road markings and signage to try and improve the situation for schools in that context. So we're working with a small number of schools initially, and then hoping that that can be rolled out to more schools in that type of context. We also have some schools where the school itself is either slightly or more than slightly outside of the town or village that it's serving, and where the connection just isn't there with the routes. So this image here on the bottom right is a school in Roscommon. They're incredibly motivated on sustainable transport, and it is really powerful, but they're also in a situation where there isn't that safe connection from the town to the school. So this is their cycle bus, again on a high-speed route, which is very challenging. And obviously that's where interventions, for example, on routes, maybe sort of are prioritized slightly over front of school, depending on the context. We're looking at what's really key for the students and parents in that situation. We also have a lot of set down areas sometimes at schools. Obviously, set down areas bring vehicles into the school. So I suppose from Safe Routes to School side, it's something that we would aim to maybe minimize or even look to remove where possible. And I'll finish with a nice success story on the next slide in relation to that. I think I touched on it already about wider active travel schemes. So I think everyone knows that there has been a significant increase in funding for active travel in Ireland, and it's fantastic to see. And that's something that Safe Routes to Schools is really benefiting from, not just because it means there's more funding for specific Safe Routes to School schemes, but also because wider active travel schemes often pick up sections of routes that have been identified in delivery plans or that support schools, and that those all together kind of start to build a really strong network and make it much easier, safer and more fun for children to use sustainable transport to get to school. And I guess the last one then is Park and Stride. So it is gaining in popularity, and I suppose it has kind of dual benefits in that it disperses traffic and it removes traffic from the front of school. Particularly if you have a context where you can identify a number of Park and Stride locations that can be promoted, it means that you might have, like, instead of having 50 cars arriving at the school, you might have 5 different locations where 10 cars go, and obviously that has impacts on general congestion within the town or village where the school is, and that it can have a really, really big impact at the front of school in terms of those cars not all arriving there at roughly the same time. There's an image here of the information leaflet that Mayo County Council have for the Park and Stride system in Castlebar. That uses a kind of a permit system so that the pay and display car parks can be used, but it depends on the context, and sometimes it can be just that there's one possible location and the school maybe has an agreement with the private owner of that car park. But it is a really effective tool, and there are a lot of opportunities, and it's a big part of Safe Routes to School delivery plans as a result. Yeah, and then just to finish, good news story. So as I mentioned, set down areas are a challenge in that they do bring vehicles into the front of school space and they can create a lot of congestion. This is St. Joseph's Primary School in Ballinrobe. Very courageous, along with the local authority, in trialling the closure of the set down area a couple of months back, and it was hugely successful. And I think it's just really lovely to see so many students here walking up to school, and yeah, it was lovely, the sound of children laughing and talking and chatting, and it was a really different experience to the other mornings when the set down area is open and it's very much dominated by cars, and really that's all you can hear. You don't really hear children chatting or, you know, having a bit of fun with each other. So yeah, it is really powerful when you can see that change happening. Sorry, and that's the end there. Thanks a million. That's our website, and just the social media handles. Just if you're interested, we share a lot of updates on things that are happening. Yeah, so you can keep track there. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. They're fantastic presentations. So thank you to our speakers. Thank you to all the attendees. I hope you found the presentations as insightful as I did. Thank you to Engineers Ireland for hosting the webinar, supporting Construct Innovate in having this series, and in particular to Sinead for facilitating the seminars. So thank you very much and have a lovely day.